Night, Normandy. A German sentry looks up and his world explodes into white. Engines roar overhead. Flares blossom in the sky like artificial suns, and then he sees them. Parachutes. Dozens, no hundreds, drifting down through the smoke and moonlight. If you were that man clutching a rifle in the hedgerows of occupied France, what would you think? An airborne invasion. Here, now, he yells, others spill from dugouts, fingers claw at binoculars. Someone shouts, Fallschirmjäger, paratroopers. Field telephones start to ring. Gunfire cracks in the distance. Faint shouts. A few sharp explosions where the first men hit the ground. For a few long minutes, the German 7th Army believes its nightmare has arrived. But when the sun finally drags itself over the horizon, when the mist lifts off the Norman fields, the truth is quietly absurd. There are no bodies, no helmets, no rifles, just sacks. Crude human shapes made of burlap and straw, tangled in hedges and hanging from apple trees. Some burned, some deflated. Eyes painted on if they have faces at all. 500 burlap men. Let me ask you something. How does that a sky full of scarecrows end up shaping one of the most important days in modern history? And why, in a war of tanks and bombers and rockets, would some of the Allies' most effective weapons be actors, painters, stage designers? And one quiet man tapping on a Morse key, pretending to be someone else. This is the story of the Doll Invasion, the Ghost Army, and the strangest lesson to come out of World War II. If you want to tell a convincing lie, you don't act like a machine. You act human. Even in war, perfect is suspicious. To really understand how a sack of straw could matter, we have to zoom out. It's 1943. The Nazis still hold most of Europe. The Red Army is bleeding in the east. And in London, in smoke-filled rooms behind blackout curtains, Allied planners are wrestling with one question. How do you land an army on a continent that's waiting for you? Hitler knows an invasion is coming. The only debate inside German headquarters is where. The shortest crossing is the Pas de Calais. It's closer to Britain, better ports. Militarily, it makes sense. So the Germans do what you do in their place. They stack their best units there. Panzer divisions, artillery, reserves. The Allies look at that map, and they see an opportunity. What if we let them be right in the wrong place? What if the Germans hold their best troops at Calais while we hit them somewhere else? But that somewhere else, Normandy, is a gamble. The beaches aren't ideal, the tides are brutal, the defenses are real. If the Germans realize too quickly where the real blow is falling, they can rush reinforcements and crush the beachhead before it grows. So the Allies decide on something almost insane in its ambition. They will invade France twice, once with men and steel and blood, and once with paper, paint, rubber, radio waves, and straw. One invasion will be real. The other will exist only in German minds. Operation Bodyguard. Inside it, the part aimed at France, Operation Fortitude. And Fortitude needs props. Let's go back to those falling parachutes. In the weeks before D-Day, while Eisenhower is rehearsing speeches and men are painting invasion stripes on their aircraft, another group is working just as hard on something much weirder, fake paratroopers. The British call them Ruperts. The Germans will call them sackmen. To us, they're simply the dolls. Picture a manufacturing shop in wartime Britain. Not shiny, not glamorous, just a dim warehouse smelling of burlap and glue and sweat. On one table, rough human shapes being stitched together, stuffed with straw or wood shavings. Simple harnesses so they can hang under parachutes. Some versions carry small explosive charges, delayed action squibs set to detonate when they hit the ground, giving off a crack of gunfire and perhaps a small flare. Stand too close and you'd laugh. They're ugly, sagging, wrong, but that's not the point. The point is, what do they look like from 800 meters away at night? With sirens wailing and adrenaline in your veins? The plan for these burlap men is simple and desperate. On the night before the invasion, a few hours before the real American and British airborne divisions drop near their true objectives, small aircraft will fly over other areas of France and the Low Countries. Over open fields, over woods, over anything that might look like a good drop zone on a German map. And they will kick out dolls. Hundreds of them tumbling into the dark on cheap parachutes. Some accompanied by very real special forces, tiny teams of British SAS and commandos tasked with firing, blowing up a few things, lighting decoy beacons, anything to amplify the illusion of thousands. The goal is not to win a battle. The goal is to start an argument. Picture the German side again. You're a duty officer in a command bunker. Phones are ringing. Reports are coming in from all over. Enemy paratroopers sighted near X. Shoots over Y, strength unknown. Taking fire from airborne troops at Z, you spread the map out and start marking. Here, here, here. If you're that officer in those hours before dawn, do you calmly analyze every detail, wait for confirmation, or do you shout for reinforcements? The paradigms are there to feed your panic, and in some places it works beautifully. German records describe landing of airborne troops in areas where no real paratrooper ever touched down. Units are sent chasing shadows. Artillery reorients. Some columns that might have moved toward the real American 82nd and 101st Airborne or toward the British 6th Airborne instead turned toward where the sacks fell. Historians still argue about the exact scale of the effect. Did it delay reinforcements by hours? By days? Probably not days. But on D-Day, a few hours can be an eternity. Here, the key though, those burlap men didn't act alone. They were one flicker in a great storm of illusions. And to see that storm, we need to leave the fields of Normandy and peek behind some very secret curtains. Somewhere in England, long before the first doll is packed into a crate, someone draws a circle on a map. The Pas de Calais, this is where the Germans expect the blow to fall. So the Allies decide to build them a gift, a fake army on the coast opposite Calais. On paper, it is the first U.S. Army group, FUSAG, under General George Patton. In reality, FUSAG is a ghost. There are some real men. Clerks, guards, signalers, enough to man phones and drive a few trucks. But the divisions, the armored regiments, the massive buildup of American power, paint, rubber, wood, radio chatter, and human imagination. Think about what it means to build an army that doesn't exist in a world where the enemy is listening, watching, analyzing. You can't just put 10 rubber tanks in a field and call it a day. You have to answer every question a suspicious mind might ask. If I'm a German photo interpreter studying a grainy image from a reconnaissance flight, what do I look for? Not just tanks. I look for tracks, for fuel dumps, for maintenance areas, for mess tents, for trucks parked differently on Wednesday than on Monday. If I'm a signals analyst combing through intercepted radio messages, what do I expect? Not perfectly regular, machine-timed transmissions. I expect human boredom, complaints, errors. Messages about leave passes and broken generators and lost mail. And that's where the secret weapon of this story comes in: artists, stage designers, set dressers, painters, sound engineers, radio hams, people whose entire job before the war was to fool you for fun, to make an audience believe a stage is a palace, a painted backdrop is a forest, a trick of light is magic. Now their job is to fool the German 7th Army, and the 15th, and the High Command. In Britain, even before the Americans form their ghost army, the British are already experimenting with theatrical imperfection. There's a simple discovery that changes everything. Perfect looks fake. You can see it yourself. Picture an overhead photo of a real field camp. Tents aren't in perfect rows. They wander a little. Trucks aren't parked at perfect right angles. They're at odd slants, squeezed into shade, huddled near fuel drums. There are muddy paths worn by feet already, not neatly pre-drawn lines. Random piles of crates, half-empty fuel cans, laundry strung between poles, personal chaos. Early in the war, when camouflage units tried to create dummy airfields or dummy camps, they often made them neat. Tents in precise grids, vehicles aligned like toy soldiers. From a human perspective on the ground, that looks organized. From the air, to a trained enemy, it looks like a set. So the deceivers start studying mess. They send photographers over real camps and frontline positions, not to capture heroism, but to capture untidiness. How do tire tracks really fan out from a road junction? How many latrines per tent line? Do people leave tools lying out? Where does the trash end up? Then they apply that knowledge to their illusions. Let's walk through one of these fake camps, built to suggest a division of FUSAG waiting to storm Calais. At a distance, it looks convincing enough. Inflatable tanks, shaped and painted to resemble Shermans, crouch under camouflage nets. Trucks, some real, many just frames with canvas skins, line up along dirt tracks. There are antenna masts, tent clusters, piles of supplies. But if you follow the path of a German reconnaissance camera, you see the details that really sell it. A tent leaning slightly, one pole shorter than the other. Laundry flapping in the wind, clearly worn, formless. Fuel drums not just in one perfect pile, but with a few rolling away, half buried in mud. Subtle variations in the spacing of tire ruts, as if driven by dozens of different impatient drivers. That's not artifice. That's theater, because that's what these men are, not just soldiers, but set dressers on the biggest stage of the war. And their philosophy boils down to one line: if it looks too good, it's no good. So they introduce mistakes on purpose. They make sure that from the air it looks like humans live here. Humans who are tired, careless, and in a hurry. The same principle will guide a young American in a radio tent months later. But we'll come to him. For now, back to June 1944. While the Germans are staring at Calais and waiting for Patton's Phantom divisions, a real armada is creeping toward Normandy. Real paratroopers are climbing into real aircraft. And packed in crates alongside them, the dolls are waiting too. The night of June 5th, 6th is chaos even without the deceivers. Clouds, flak, navigation errors, American paratroopers scatter across the countryside, sometimes miles from their drop zones. British gliders crash through hedges and into trees. For the paradigmy teams, this fog of war is both blessing and curse. On the one hand, confusion helps them. If German units are already scrambled by real reports, adding fake ones is like turning up the volume on chaos. On the other hand, not everything goes according to plan. In some drop zones, the dolls drift silently down, barely noticed, landing in empty fields. In others, they do their job too well, setting off frantic firing that accidentally hits real Allied aircraft passing overhead. And yet in enough places, they get under German skin. There's a story, perhaps apocryphal, of a German patrol approaching what they think is a dead paratrooper tangled in a tree. Rifles at the ready, they creep forward. And then one of them laughs, reaching up and yanking on a limp burlap leg. "Es ist ein Pup, it's a doll." Humor in the middle of a nightmare. But remember, by the time that patrol is poking at straw, the phone calls have already been made. The reports have already reached headquarters. Maps have already been marked with red pencil. This is the heart of deception. You don't need your lie to survive daylight. You just need it to live long enough to trigger a reaction. And on June 6th, the reactions matter. The German 7th Army is distracted by phantom landings. The nearby 15th Army, guarding Pas de Calais, hears whispers of airborne troops everywhere, but still has intelligence insisting the main blow is yet to come across the shortest route. So they wait, and they keep waiting. For hours on that first day, as American and British and Canadian troops claw their way off the beaches, as hedgerows are stained and villages burn, there are German units within reach that do not move. Why? Because of dolls? Because of inflatable tanks? Because a double agent in Spain sends a carefully worded message? The honest answer is because of all of it. Because of an entire ecosystem of lies. And that's where the American Ghost Army enters our story. By the late summer of 1944, the Allies are off the beaches. They've broken out of Normandy, liberated Paris, and are racing across France. The need for deception hasn't ended. It's just changed. Instead of convincing the Germans that an invasion will happen in one place, now the goal is to convince them that armies are stronger, weaker, or somewhere else entirely. You're moving fast. Your front is thin in places, thick in others. If you can make the enemy believe there's a full division where there's really just a regiment, you might stop an attack before it starts. The British deception artists have been at this for years. Now, the U.S. Army creates something unique. A unit whose whole job is to pretend to be other units. On paper, they're the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. In practice, they're something out of a strange comic book, an army of ghosts, built from painters, draftsmen, radio men, actors, sound engineers, and a handful of combat engineers to protect them while they work. They'll operate in France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Germany. They'll stage more than 20 major deceptions. And for decades after the war, almost no one will know they existed. Within the 23rd, there are three main weapons: visual deception, tanks, guns, trucks that can be inflated like party balloons, then painted and posed; sonic deception, massive speakers and recordings that can simulate entire armored columns moving at night; and radio deception, the art of lying with dits and dahs. We're going to linger on that third one, because that's where the idea of acting human becomes almost painfully literal. But first, picture the visual side to understand the mindset these men live in. You're a young art student from New York or Philadelphia. You thought you'd spend the war sketching in some corner or maybe at an aircraft plant. Instead, you find yourself in a muddy field in France, wrestling with 800 pounds of rubber that refuses to cooperate. Tank is a generous word for the deflated lump at your feet. But slowly, as air pumps wheeze and canvas unfurls, a shape emerges. Turret. Gun barrel, treads molded into the sides. It looks like a Sherman, at least from 50 meters away. To a pilot flying at 15,000 feet, snapping a quick photograph on a shaky camera, more than good enough. These inflatable tanks are miracles of design. They can be rolled up, thrown into trucks, and popped up overnight to create what looks like a new armored brigade to anyone glancing from the sky. But again, just like with the British decoy camps, The men of the 23rd learn very quickly. If they arrange them too perfectly, they look wrong. So you'll hear veterans of the Ghost Army talk about messing things up. They didn't just inflate tanks. They scuffed the ground with tracks. They drove real jeeps around in sloppy loops to create tire patterns. They hung camouflage nets badly in a few spots because real soldiers are not always meticulous. They opened hatches on some dummy vehicles and left them that way, like a crew had just hopped out. They learned to dress the set, the same way a Hollywood art director does. One vet recalled that the line they'd use was, "Make it look like the Army spent a week here and didn't clean up." And that's a strange position to be in, isn't it? You're in uniform, you've been through training, you're technically in a combat zone. But your day's work might be figuring out the right way to drape a fake tarpaulin so it looks like there's a real generator humming underneath. Some of them struggled with that. Imagine knowing that just a few miles away, men are in trench lines under fire while you're arguing about paint shades for a rubber tank. Was it enough? Was it real service? Most of them only truly knew the answer when the German artillery found them, because the 23rd was not invincible. And the enemy didn't know they were fake. At times, their illusions worked too well. The Germans saw concentrations of troops and armor and responded with shelling and probes. The Ghost Army took casualties, light by frontline standards, but real. Dead, wounded, captured. Lying, it turns out, can get you killed. Which brings us to the quietest liars in the unit, the radio men, including one named Jack Dramis. Pause a moment and think about Morse code. If you've never used it, it probably sounds like random beeping, dots and dashes, quick and slow. But to people who lived on it, who spent hours with headphones clamped over their ears, it was more than that. Every operator had something called a fist. It's a lovely odd term, the rhythm, the timing, the small quirks of how they pressed the key. Some people sent fast and crisp. Some dragged certain letters just a bit. Some made consistent mistakes and then corrected them in a particular way. To a good signals analyst, code didn't just carry words, it carried personality. So when the Ghost Army set up a fake radio net to simulate, say, the 6th Armored Division moving into a new sector, they had a problem. The Germans were listening. And the Germans had been listening to the real 6th Armored for months. They knew its voice. Simply spinning up a new operator who tapped out perfect textbook code was a red flag. You might as well shout, "This is a recording, don't believe this." So men like Jack Dramis got an unusual assignment. They had to impersonate other people, one tap at a time. Here's how it worked. Before a deception, Ghost Army radio specialists would study the target unit's transmissions. They'd listen to call signs, traffic patterns, and crucially, the fists of key operators. Was the main net controller slightly sloppy on numerals? Did the night shift operator tend to speed up when tired? Did someone consistently send an extra dot on a certain letter, then pause and resend it? These quirks were cataloged not as code, but as character. Then when that real unit moved elsewhere, the Ghost Army moved in on the air. Operators like Dramis would sit at their sets and become their counterparts. Not in costume, not on a stage, but in rhythm. He'd mimic the pauses, the hesitations, even the errors. Imagine the mental gymnastics that requires. You're already speaking in a second language, Morse. On top of that, you're imposing a second personality. You have to remember to be imperfect in the right ways. One misstumble, one transmission that sounds a little too clean, and somewhere in a German listening post, a technician might frown. Komisch, strange, he's sending better tonight. Maybe they shrug, maybe they investigate. In this game, you don't actually know. You rarely get feedback. So you live in this twilight world where your entire goal is to be convincingly flawed. That is theatrical imperfection at its purest. Jack Dramis isn't alone in this. There are teams of such operators building entire fake radio nets, chatter between battalions, logistics requests, weather reports, all the million little messages that make up a living army. They seed it with mundane detail, not just dramatic orders. Because again, perfect is suspicious. If a unit's radio net only talks about big offensives and never about latrines or missing trucks, it feels like fiction. So they include the little nothings, the coffee complaint of war. And somewhere across the line, German SIGINT offices dutifully record it all, draw new unit symbols on their maps and brief their commanders. An armored division has moved into this sector. An armored division that exists only in rubber, paint, and the hands of a man pretending to be someone else. If you were that radio operator, could you do it? Could you quiet your own habits, your own voice? and slip into another man's skin for hours, knowing that no one on your side will ever cheer you for it, that your success is measured only in the absence of German troops where they might otherwise have been? It's not glamorous, it's not Hollywood, but it is one of the most human things in this entire story. Let's stitch these threads together now. Burlap dolls falling from the night. Inflatable tanks basking under a French sun. A man's hand hovering over a telegraph key, making mistakes on purpose. Different tools, different scales, same idea. The enemy believes in people, not machines, not abstractions. They believe in what they think a human soldier, a human unit will do. So to fool them, you don't build a perfect copy of a tank. You build a copy of how a human crew treats that tank. You don't broadcast flawless, mathematically silent code. You broadcast the tiny, messy fingerprints of an operator who occasionally hits the wrong key when he's tired at 3 a.m. You don't drop anatomically perfect mannequins from the sky. You drop rough shapes, because at 3 in the morning, in the glare of flares and the roar of engines, no one is counting fingers. Over and over, the deceivers in World War II discover a hard truth, one that feels almost philosophical. The more precise and polished your lie is, the less we believe it. Think about our own lives. We instinctively distrust something that looks too good to be true. The Ghost Army, the planners of Fortitude, the makers of Ruperts, they all weaponize that instinct. They seed their lies with flaws, and those flaws save lives. How many? That's always the question, isn't it? The story is often compressed into a neat line. Fortitude kept 15 German divisions frozen for 6 weeks. Reality is messier. German commanders weren't hypnotized. They debated, doubted, argued. Some saw through parts of the deception, others didn't. But what we can say is this. In the weeks after D-Day, German High Command kept significant combat power, more than a dozen divisions north of the Seine near Pas-de-Calais, waiting for a second invasion that never came. They did this even as bloody reports flooded in from Normandy, even as Allied troops broke out of the beachhead and began racing inland. Why? Because the story they'd been fed felt complete, coherent. Human, agents they trusted, who had in fact been turned by the Allies, told them that Normandy was a feint. A great American army under Patton, with its rubber tanks and fake camps and faithful radio ghosts, seemed poised across from Calais. Recon photos showed tents, vehicles, masts. The dolls on D-Day, they were the spark in that larger tapestry. One more sign of widespread airborne activity consistent with what the Germans already believed, the Ghost Army in France. They extended that logic deeper into the continent, battle by battle, convincing Germans to defend the wrong bridge, the wrong town, the wrong line. In other words, none of these tricks worked alone. But together, they burdened German decision-making. They added friction and doubt. If you've ever tried to make a difficult choice while drowning in conflicting information, you know how that feels. Now imagine trying to do it while bombs are falling. There's one more layer to this story that often gets overlooked. We talk about strategy and cleverness and saving lives through deception. We don't always talk about what it meant to the deceivers themselves. Imagine being a Ghost Army soldier standing on a hillside at dusk, watching a line of real American infantry march past you, rifles over their shoulders, faces set toward the front. You're wearing the same uniform, but you're about to go down into a valley and set up fake artillery pieces. Do you feel guilty, relieved, both? Many veterans later said they struggled with it during the war. They didn't quite know where they fit. Worse, they were often ordered to be closer to the enemy than the real frontline units. Why? Because for an illusion to be credible, it has to be placed where the threat would logically be. So these lightly armed artists and radio men sometimes found themselves holding exposed salients or noisy positions meant to draw fire, with little more than pistols and carbines to defend themselves, hoping that their show would convince the Germans not to test it too hard. That knowledge, if we succeed, they won't come. If we fail, they will, is its own kind of strain. You're fighting a war with lies, but you can die with the truth like anyone else. And then there's the moral question. Is deception in war noble? Dishonorable? Just another tool? Some of the Ghost Army veterans later reflected that the only way they could reconcile what they did was to focus on one thing. Every German shell that hit an inflatable tank was one that didn't hit a real crew. Every division that halted because of a ghost on a map was one that didn't roll over a battalion of 19-year-olds from Ohio or Yorkshire or Alberta. By that measure, their lies were an act of mercy. Not toward the men they were fooling, but toward the men they were protecting. Still, they carried the secrecy with them for decades. The unit's existence remained officially classified long after the war. Many of them never told their families what they had really done. "How was your war, Dad?" "Oh, I moved around with headquarters, nothing much." Quiet men with loud stories locked away. It's only in recent years that their work has been fully declassified, studied, honored. They're old now or gone. But their strange, theatrical, almost unbelievable war has something to say to us if we listen. We live in a world obsessed with precision. Algorithms, automation, clean graphics, perfect feeds, zero errors. We're told that the future is machine-like, seamless, frictionless, flawless. Yet here's this odd lesson from the mud of 1944: when everything is too perfect, we flinch. We look for the flaw because humanity is the flaw. We stutter when we speak. We park crooked. We send a typo and correct it, grumbling. The Ghost Army and their British predecessors discovered that to be believed, a fake must wear those imperfections like a disguise. So they scuffed their painted trucks. They hung laundry on fake lines. They made radio errors on purpose. They understood that the uncanny valley isn't just about faces, it's about behavior. Their enemy watched them, listened to them, measured them, and saw what they expected to see: humans. Tired, messy, occasionally incompetent humans. And in that recognition, the lies took root. It's tempting to see all this as a quaint footnote, a curiosity from another era. But think about the age we're sliding into now with deepfakes, synthetic voices, AI-written text. Once again, we're wrestling with the question the Ghost Army quietly answered in a French field. What makes something feel real? Is it precision, smoothness, zero error? Or is it the opposite, the little stumbles, the unscripted details, the off-key notes? If you wanted to spot a fake today, what would you look for? And if you wanted to build one, would you dare to make it imperfect? It's eerie, isn't it, how a burlap doll falling through a 1944 night can whisper a warning to the 21st century. That in a world of increasingly convincing illusions, our best defense may be to remember what actual life looks like: smudged, uneven, slightly off-center. Just like a Ghost Army camp seen from 15,000 feet. Just like Jack Dramis' hand hovering over a key, adding one extra dot where the man he's imitating always added one. Then pausing, then correcting. Just like a German sentry blinking up at the sky, absolutely sure he's seeing an army when in truth, it's only 500 sacks of straw, playing the most expensive magic trick in history. So the next time you see a crisp photograph of D-Day, or a clean arrow sweeping across a map in a documentary, remember what's missing in those tidy depictions. Remember the offstage hands, the painter adjusting a shadow under a rubber tank, the engineer hiding a loudspeaker behind a hedgerow to make 10 Jeeps sound like 200. The radio operator, alone at night, trying to think like a stranger. Remember that some of the most decisive blows in that war were struck not by bullets, but by stories. Stories told so well with such carefully placed flaws that an entire army believed in men who were never there. And ask yourself one last question. If you had been on the receiving end, if you were that German colonel with a map and a telephone, drowning in reports of parachutes and tanks and radio chatter, would you have seen through it? Or would you have done what they did? Shifted your pins on the map, moved your units, and in so doing, helped an invisible army of dolls and ghosts change the course of history? Because that, in the end, may be the most human truth of all. We don't act based on what's real. We act based on what we believe. And in 1944, for a few critical weeks, the Allies made sure the German High Command believed in the wrong war. All thanks to burlap dolls, inflatable tanks. And men who understood that the most powerful lie is the one wrapped in very human imperfections.